When the WoW developers were first planning out which classes players would be allowed to play, Druids were not on that original shortlist. But Blizzard did have 9 classes planned in the original list. Basically, warriors, paladins, shamans, priests, hunters, mages, and warlocks were all in the design table from the beginning. And in addition to those 7, they also had assassins and rune masters. Assassins eventually got converted into rogues, as they even have a spec called assassination, and rune masters were never actually added to the game. Now, the idea behind rune masters was to have an unarmed fighter who had runes on their body which gave them magical properties, and they were kind of like an enchanter, but a whole class based around enchanting their bodies in order to do magic or physical feats. And they had even planned on having rune masters being one of the hero classes once they eventually decided to not include it in vanilla, and he would be alongside the death knights and necromancers. And that also means they had planned on adding necromancers to the game at some point, just as a hero class which was supposed to be better than normal classes. So they never actually went with rune masters, but they did like the ideas behind some of its flavor. So they kind of split it up into the death knight and monk classes that were eventually added. Death knights have a rune system to use their magic, similar to how they wanted rune masters to work, and monks are an unarmed class, who do basically the other side of what rune masters were supposed to be. And then they eventually just added druids because that's a fantasy staple, and there were already some pretty notable lore figures that are druids, so it only made sense for them to add them. And funny enough, druids were not the last class added into the game, or programmed in anyway. They just weren't on the original design table for classes. Hunters were actually the last class to be added, or programmed into the game, and even then, they only barely made it in. And their design philosophy with druids was that they wanted them to shapeshift a whole bunch, so they gave druids a whole bunch of abilities that could only be used in their various shapeshifting forms. And they'd intended for players to be constantly shapeshifting in battle in order to do their full rotations and stuff. But there was one little caveat to this that they had kind of overlooked. Shapeshifting cost way too much mana to do that. And the final talent point in their feral tree for a time was a talent that reduced the shapeshifting cost by 25%. Which did not alleviate this problem at all, I might add. Shapeshifting still cost a ton of mana, but Blizzard was happy if a class was good at least one role in a raid, and druids could function as a healer in raids, as they gave innervates to priests or other healers, so they considered them good to go, even if the design philosophy they were supposed to be doing in raids didn't actually work. You know, the whole shapeshift and a whole bunch of things. Eventually, later on in the game's history, they did a much better job of encouraging druids to shapeshift more in combat, but generally only in PvP, as PvP players would shift into bear form in order to tank damage or to use their stun ability, and then shift into travel form to run away or go behind pillars, then go into human form to heal up. So if you want the true shape-shifting druid fantasy, you kind of have to play PvP for it, as in raids and dungeons you basically just stay in one form the whole time. Alright, that's it for the video. I know it's kind of a short one, but basically, when they were deciding which classes to add to the game, druids weren't on the table at first, but they eventually did get added in. And one of the classes they did have on the original list never got added to the game.